In early 2025, a diplomatic firestorm erupted along the US-Canada border, sending shockwaves through both nations and capturing the world's attention. What began as a simmering dispute over trade and policy quickly escalated into a full-blown crisis, threatening to upend decades of peaceful coexistence. The world's longest undefended boundary, once a symbol of trust and friendship, suddenly became a flashpoint for international tension and uncertainty. This crisis wasn't about armies or weapons, but about tariffs, tolls, and the high-stakes game of political brinkmanship. Economic weapons replaced military ones, as both sides maneuvered for advantage. At the heart of the standoff were the critical land routes connecting Alaska to the lower 48 states, lifelines that all run through Canadian territory, making them vulnerable to political decisions. President Trump's aggressive economic policies, including sweeping new tariffs, triggered a swift and bold response from Canadian provincial leaders who refused to back down. In a dramatic move, British Columbia announced plans to impose steep tolls on U.S. commercial traffic, a direct counterstrike that threatened to choke off vital supply lines and escalate the conflict even further. The standoff sent shockwaves through businesses, residents, and the U.S. military, all of whom rely on this vital corridor for goods, services, and security. Uncertainty gripped communities on both sides of the border. This analysis traces the unfolding timeline: U.S. tariffs, Canadian countermeasures, and the motivations of leaders like Trump, Trudeau, and British Columbia's David Eby, each playing a pivotal role in the drama. We'll examine the economic and logistical fallout for Alaska, where empty shelves and supply shortages became a daily reality, and explore the legal and diplomatic complexities that made resolution so elusive. The dispute forced both nations to re-examine their deep dependencies on trade, energy, and transportation infrastructure that had long been taken for granted. As the crisis unfolded, it tested the very foundation of US-Canada cooperation, raising profound doubts about the resilience of their historic partnership and the future of cross-border relations. The spark was President Trump's sweeping 25% tariff on Canadian goods in March 2025. Framed as protection for American jobs, the tariffs hit a wide range of sectors, signaling maximum pressure. Trump's rhetoric was personal and incendiary, accusing Prime Minister Trudeau of weakness and stoking nationalist fervor. At a rally, Trump declared, "Canada wants to be the gatekeeper to Alaska, not on my watch." Some exemptions and temporary reprieves followed, but the core tariffs remained, fueling Canadian outrage. Canadian leaders saw the move as economic aggression, not negotiation. The tariffs threatened billions in cross-border trade, risking job losses and price hikes on both sides. Key industries, lumber, aluminum, auto parts, were especially vulnerable. This was the opening salvo in a tit-for-tat conflict, setting the stage for unprecedented friction between the two allies. British Columbia struck back with a bold and unexpected move, determined to show it would not be pushed around by its powerful southern neighbor. Premier David Eby announced sweeping plans to impose tolls on U.S. trucks traveling to and from Alaska, a direct response to the mounting trade tensions and tariffs imposed by the United States. The Alaska Highway, a vital artery connecting Alaska to the rest of the U.S. through British Columbia, suddenly became a powerful bargaining chip. With its network of way stations and checkpoints, BC could easily enforce tolls, making the threat very real. Eby didn't mince words, calling Trump's tariffs an economic war, and promising to defend Canadian interests at all costs. He positioned himself as a champion of Canadian sovereignty. In a fiery speech, he accused Trump of wanting to annex Canada, a claim that, while exaggerated, electrified the public and drew sharp lines in the sand. The threat of tolls was both credible and potent, instantly rallying support not just in British Columbia, but across the entire country. Canadians from coast to coast saw this as a stand for national pride. BC's government also took swift action, ordering all provincial agencies to halt purchases of American-made products, sending a clear message to U.S. businesses. In a further escalation, the province banned liquor imports from Republican-led states, including Alaska, targeting a symbolic and lucrative market. These targeted measures were designed to inflict real economic pain, demonstrating BC's resolve and willingness to fight back against American pressure. The message was unmistakable. If the U.S. hurt Canada economically, British Columbia would respond in kind, refusing to back down. The province's bold stance put real pressure on U.S. supply lines, threatening to disrupt the flow of goods to and from Alaska. The Alaska Highway, once just a remote road through the wilderness, was now a powerful lever in an escalating international dispute, with the eyes of both nations watching closely. BC's defiance inspired a wave of retaliation across Canada. The Yukon, also traversed by the Alaska Highway, halted liquor purchases from U.S. companies and restricted American firms from bidding on government contracts. Though small, Yukon's actions carried symbolic weight, signaling solidarity with BC. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford imposed a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S., a major blow to American states reliant on Canadian power. These moves showed that resistance to Trump's tariffs was national, not just regional. Provinces and territories united, signaling to Washington that Canada would not bear the pain alone. The coordinated response targeted U.S. consumers, businesses, and state governments. Canada's message economic aggression would be met with costly countermeasures. The front against U.S. tariffs was now broad and formidable. While provinces retaliated, Prime Minister Trudeau's federal government took a more diplomatic approach. Trudeau condemned the tariffs as very dumb but focused on negotiation and de-escalation. Ottawa engaged in high-level talks with U.S. officials, seeking a path to resolution. The federal strategy denounced tariffs publicly, but worked quietly to protect the broader partnership. Ottawa let premiers like Eby take the public lead, while maintaining plausible deniability. Some officials reframed potential highway restrictions as environmental or safety measures, not just retaliation. This allowed the government to support provincial actions without escalating the rhetoric. The provinces absorbed the political heat, while Ottawa positioned itself as the reasonable actor. The goal: maximum pressure on the U.S., minimum risk of all-out economic war. For Alaska, the dispute created immediate vulnerability. Separated from the lower 48, Alaska relies on routes through Canada for vital goods. The threat of tolls alarmed the Alaska Trucking Association, warning of higher prices for essentials. While most cargo arrives by sea or air, the highway is crucial for time-sensitive shipments, fresh food, industrial parts, and oil equipment. Disruption could delay projects and hurt quality of life. Tourism was also at risk. Nearly 2 million cruise passengers depend on stops in British Columbia, a legal requirement for foreign-flagged ships. Any port disruption could cripple Alaska's tourism industry. The human cost was real. Seasonal workers, military families, and residents faced uncertainty and anxiety. The highway was more than a road. It was Alaska's lifeline, now under threat. The Alaska Highway, built in World War II as a military supply route, is now the focal point of this international standoff. Stretching nearly 1,400 miles from BC to Alaska, it's the only all-weather land link to the state. After the war, Canada took control of its sections. No treaty guarantees the U.S. toll-free access. Canada's legal sovereignty over the highway is clear, weakening U.S. arguments based on history. The highway's geography, few roads, established way stations, makes tolls easy to enforce. Unlike a complex border, all traffic funnels through a single corridor. This gives BC real leverage. Tolls could be implemented quickly, squeezing Alaska's supply chain. The U.S. faces a practical, not just political challenge. The highway's strategic value has become a powerful bargaining chip. The dispute quickly entered the realm of international law and diplomacy, drawing in legal experts, diplomats, and policymakers from both sides of the border. What began as a regional disagreement soon became a test of international norms and the strength of cross-border relationships. Canada's sovereign right to regulate its territory is clear. No treaty compels it to provide unfettered land access to Alaska. The border, marked by decades of negotiation and careful agreements, is ultimately under Canadian jurisdiction, and Ottawa holds the authority to decide how it is managed. U.S. arguments appeal to historical cooperation, but legally, the case is weak. While the two countries have a long tradition of working together, especially during times of crisis, there is no binding legal obligation for Canada to allow unrestricted passage. American diplomats focused on persuading Canada that tolls would damage the long-term relationship. They emphasized the importance of trust, economic partnership, and the shared history that has defined the border for generations. The USMCA trade agreement offers a possible but complicated path for dispute resolution. While it provides mechanisms for settling trade disagreements, applying them to a case involving border tolls and access rights is far from straightforward. The U.S. could claim tolls are illegal trade barriers. Canada could argue they're a direct response to U.S. tariffs. Each side would marshal legal teams and economic experts preparing for a lengthy and potentially contentious process. Any legal battle would be slow and uncertain. International arbitration can take years, and outcomes are never guaranteed, leaving both countries in a state of limbo. Another layer, First Nations rights, adds further complexity. Indigenous communities have lived along the Alaska Highway for generations, and their voices are crucial in any decision-making process. Canada must consult Indigenous communities whose lands the highway crosses. Their legal rights and historical claims cannot be ignored, and any changes to the highway's operation require meaningful engagement and consent. This gives Ottawa a legitimate reason to review highway operations, adding complexity and leverage. The government must balance international obligations, domestic law, and the interests of Indigenous peoples. The legal and diplomatic terrain is as challenging as the highway itself, winding through a landscape of competing interests, historical ties, and evolving international law. The 2025 Alaska access dispute has pushed U.S.-Canada relations to a breaking point. What began as a trade spat became a confrontation over sovereignty, supply chains, and national pride. Alaska's vulnerability and Canada's leverage have been laid bare. The United Canadian response shows the power of coordinated action. The standoff is a clash of America First versus Canadian economic sovereignty. Resolution depends on whether diplomats can move past rhetoric and restore trust. The Alaska Highway, once a symbol of unity, is now a flashpoint. The outcome will shape North American trade and diplomacy for years to come.